Hello. Quick, hopefully very brief, take on number sets and ways to remember them. It's strange to talk about numbers as though they have a history, though they obviously do, and we just tend to think of the numbers as the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and on. The numbers that we think of them are called the Arabic numerals, but we know that they aren't the only kinds of numbers. So to start with, there are a number of different number sets, and they have changed in very complex ways throughout the world over the course of history. I'm not going to get into all of that, obviously, but I'm going to talk about just enough of it to give us a way of remembering this stuff. So earliest numbers were probably just scratches in the dirt or sand or on a wall somewhere in a cave. We do have prehistoric evidence of tally marks, and those are probably some of the oldest, numbers, if you could call them that. Now, those kinds of numbers, those counting numbers, belong to the number set of the natural numbers. We would just consider these like 1, 2, or 3, 4, 5, 6, on and on and on. But really, the first examples of these being written down would just look like tallies. Now, later natural number sets would have different symbols, such as in the Roman Empire, we have on the Colosseum, LII, 52. Can't remember why that's 50. I think it was something to do with the year it was made or something like that. Can't remember, sorry. But these are still natural numbers. So Roman numerals are natural numbers, just counting numbers. There are no negatives, and there's also no zero in any of this stuff. The concept of zero was known and talked about, but as actually having a symbol to indicate nothing in math or a placeholder, there was nothing as far. The Roman Empire didn't have it at all. Made math fairly difficult. They could still build some pretty impressive structures and do some pretty advanced engineering without zero, but it was hard. Now, again, zero as a concept is talked about in a lot of different places, but to actually write it down, again, there are a lot of places in the world that probably did this at some point in time. But it was given its own character by many different cultures. It found its way to Europe. I'll talk about why I'm talking about Europe more than any other place later on, along with the other Arabic numerals, which are the numbers that we actually consider just our numbers now, through the Muslim Ottomans in Spain. So, after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was an Ottoman Empire that had quite a lot of territory, and there was a huge storehouse of knowledge in this empire. I mean, they had Cairo and Alexandria and all of Greece and Constantinople, libraries everywhere. Built a lot of knowledge, also saved a lot from the fallen Roman Empire as well. And so they expanded, and there was a fellow, I think, by the name of Umayyad. I'm probably pronouncing that right, but he ended up expanding into Spain. It was called at the time Andalus. And it was from there that the concept of zero and the Arabic numerals actually made their way to Europe. So the whole numbers, zero as well as all of these counting numbers, didn't really show up in Europe until like the 1300s or so. Something like that, anyway. Then from there, we carry on into the next number set. Integers, negative numbers. There's a recorded use in China. There was a lot of bureaucracy and obviously accounting is a big thing that was actually developed in China. There's also some formal rules that were developed in India for debts and credits. different colors used for positive and negative. We still do that today. So those are the integers where they first showed up. So that's yet another layer here. Oops. It's supposed to be a circle, but hey. An artist I am not. It's math class, not artist class. So the integers include 0, they include the counting numbers, but they also include negatives. Then at last, we come to rational numbers. Now, the root word for rational number is ratio, which is another way of saying fraction. Now, the idea of ratios is ancient, going back to Greece and India, but a lot of work in organizing this modern idea of rational numbers, kind of setting up the rules with the Arabic numerals and all of that, was done by this fellow named Giuseppe Piano, an Italian fellow. A lot of his notations are still used today, like the symbol Q for rational numbers. I'll get into why we didn't use R for that. So rational numbers are at long last the first place where we will have fractions and decimals. Again, the rational numbers contain the natural counting numbers, 0 for the whole numbers, and the negative integers. But we also have stuff like -4/3 or 1.75. The strict definition is you can break any of these numbers down into a number divided by another number as long as that bottom number is not 0. Again, we could write 2 simply as 2/1, or we could write -3 as -1.5. So all of the integers, whole numbers, natural numbers are included in the rational numbers, denoted again by Q. Which then brings us to why we talk about this in this unit in the first place, if this is Math 10 here. To the irrational numbers. Now, a lot of this stuff is very old, so it's sometimes a bit hard to pin down exactly what's just a story and what's true, but it's arguably first discovered, this concept of irrational numbers, by the Pythagoreans in ancient times. They were not particularly happy with this, though, because they believed the world should be explained perfectly with ratios. So there is a fellow, Hippasus, probably butchering the pronunciation of that fellow's name, but he discovered it and was going to publicize it somewhat, apparently. And so the Pythagoreans had him killed because, well, it was a threat to their worldview. Now, irrational numbers are denoted by Q with a little dash up top. And they are their own thing, off doing their own thing. They cannot be expressed exactly as a fraction. Any decimal will be non-terminating and non-repeating. So things like pi and non-perfect square radicals. These things are irrational. The only way to exactly write pi is to write the symbol pi or describe it as the circumference of a circle divided by its diameter. The only way to perfectly write the square root of 2 is as the square root of 2. So, which this comes actually from the whole idea if you have a right angle triangle. This is 1 unit, this is 1 unit, this will be the square root of 2 units. This is the thing that got Hippasus killed. This cannot be described by a perfect fraction of any sort. It is an irrational number. So, irrational numbers are not contained within any of these. They are their own separate thing, and that makes life difficult. Now, all of this stuff is under the umbrella of the real numbers. So everything here is part of the real numbers R. That's why we don't have a Q for either of these, the rationals or irrationals, already taken by the real numbers. All real numbers means is you can plot any of this stuff on a number line. Even irrational numbers on a number line, I can still tell that pi is somewhere between 3 and 4. It's somewhere around here. Like pi, I can tell you where it is. It's still a real number that way. Square root of 2 is 1.4 something, something, something going on forever. So the square root of 2 is about here. We can still plot these on a number line or a graph, so they're still real numbers. So going from natural to whole numbers to integers to rationals, irrationals, all real numbers, ways of remembering this is, in this case, taking a quick walk through history. Very brief, obviously. There's probably some real math historians that are rolling in their graves right now. But the idea is, if I can come up with some sort of through line or story about this stuff, natural numbers prehistory, marks on ancient bone, and the Romans building an empire with no zero at all. Zero was brought to Europe much later by a different empire. The integers used for things like accounting, and so having rules like debits and credits. It was actually the Eastern world that put this stuff down on paper first before anyone else. Rational numbers, the idea of a ratio or fractions. Old idea with our Arabic numerals that we use, kind of formalized by that Italian fella. And then irrational numbers, that closely guarded secret by the ancient Pythagoreans that didn't like that idea that things couldn't be described perfectly as ratios. They're just, these numbers are kind of, there's only one way to write them. They're all real numbers. Just a kind of a quick walk through history that helps us to remember this sort of stuff. Hope that is somewhat helpful for organizing the number sets in your mind. Take care. Happy studying.